Welcome back to Those Happy Places, the podcast that treats theme park rides and attractions like literature. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
And this week we'll be talking about Disney's California Adventure and its perceived failure, both in theming and in storytelling during its early years.
We'll also be looking at the stated ambitions of the park while exploring the concept of Simulacra in relationship to a theme park based almost entirely around real-life cultural landmarks.
But first, hey Alice.
Yeah, buddy?
You and I were about, 11, 12 years old when California Adventure opened? Am I right?
That's about right, yes.
And when the park opened, we were both annual pass holders who were regular visitors. Am I right about that?
Right again.
So when you were a kid, experiencing this brand new thing, the first theme park opened in California by Disney in the last 50 years, nearly. Did you experience any of the things that people, in retrospect, were critical of in the park?
That is a complicated question. My first reaction was to say, no, absolutely not, that I loved California Adventure right from the beginning. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm just remembering the good times that we had at California Adventure. Like, we used to go all the time, and we had our favorites, and we were annoying little, teenagers causing a ruckus. And I think that might have been fun, but I'm not sure if it's nostalgia tinting my first my gut reaction to that. What about you? Do you remember any of the criticisms, or if they meant anything to you back then when it opened?
It's funny. I don't remember hearing about, and keep in mind we were both kids at the time, but I don't really recall hearing about all of the criticisms that, now that we do a little bit of research and we kind of reflect on the park. I don't recall hearing about them until I saw, of all things, an episode of The Simpsons, where I think they got arrested and thrown into a secret CIA prison. And they broke out, and at the end of it, somebody says, well, still beats Disney's California Adventure. And that was the first time that I thought to myself, wait a minute, do people think California Adventure is bad? And then I kind of started to develop kind of some opinions in that direction, kind of around that time. And I really think about the first thing that stands out to me in the badness department is how we kind of had to create our own fun, just like you were saying.
Yeah,
right?
We always did. We always created our own fun. We had inside jokes, and we had certain spots in the park that we knew weren't going to be very crowded that we could go to and just kick it with our friends.
Yeah, and it was mostly a hangout spot more than anything. Especially, I remember eating at the McDonald's that was there, Burger Invasion it was called.
Oh my gosh, I forgot they had a McDonald's there.
Yeah, it was a $10 Big Mac. And I remember just kind of hanging out in that huge, nearly always empty seating area over by Paradise Pier. And I remember
the tortilla factory and the sourdough bread factory.
Yeah, so we would go and grab our free tortilla and our free slice of sourdough, and we would nosh on that and just kind of sit around and kind of watch the park go by. But I don't really remember really wanting to go on any of the rides outside of Screamin' and Soarin' and
the Maliboomer.
Oh, the Maliboomer, yeah. And maybe the swings, but, I kind of remember even avoiding the Sun Wheel, which is now Mickey's Fun Wheel, because it was just kind of...
The line was so long.
Yeah, and it always kind of underwhelmed or overwhelmed with the motion of the cars. So it was just a lot, is how I remember it in the early days. I remember it being a lot. And just kind of all at once. And now looking back, now that we've done a little bit of research, I think we've kind of landed on some of the reasons maybe that these feelings maybe have come back up, or maybe why we just kind of naturally started treating the park this way. And I think it comes down to the way DCA, as it is called, tells its story. And that story is kind of complicated.
I think we should start by talking about the story that Disney California Adventure was trying to tell on day one, on the day that it opened, in 2001, in February 2001. I think we should talk a little bit about the attractions and shows that were present, and the theming and story that the park was trying to tell.
So, Alice, when Disney's California Adventure opened in February of 2001, there were 4 districts with 22 shows and attractions and 15 restaurants.
That seems like a lot of restaurants.
It is, and that was an initial complaint, is that there seemed, at least from a guest perspective, to be more shops and restaurants than there were actual attractions. A lot of the attractions that opened, a few of them, have basically, they've survived unchanged since park's opening, right?
Right. A lot of the structure of the park itself is still there. Paradise Pier, the Grizzly Peak, the different, the shape of the park is all still about the same. It still has a similar plaza opening, but a lot of the opening day icons are no longer present in the park. For example, the big the word California right out front is gone, as well as the replica of the Golden Gate Bridge, which you could see from far away, and you pass under on your way into the park. Those both of those are gone, which changed a lot of the facade of walking into California Adventure. Was supposed to look like you were walking into a postcard of California.
Right, and at the time, that was actually one of the largest mosaics in the world. This beautiful, in retrospect, truly beautiful mosaic-style entrance with the huge California letters right in front of the park, kind of sinking into the park. You can kind of see the postcard kind of opened up so that you could walk through it.
Right. It was like you stepped off of the street and into a postcard of the idealized California.
And I think idealized California is a term that's going to come up a lot in this discussion, right?
Definitely.
It was this idea that here's California, no warts at all, California as we wish it could be. In a lot of ways, that mirrors Main Street USA, and kind of what we were talking about with the trains last week.
Right. It's like Main Street USA is supposed to be welcome to insert generic small town America here, whereas the entrance to California Adventure is as if you were walking into every California town at once.
The whole darn state at one time.
It's like Main Street USA, but somehow, even though it's a whole state, more specific.
It's funny that it kind of has both that specificity and that generality. And I think that contrast is really interesting. Of course, now we know that it has been remodeled into Buena Vista Street, right? So a lot of that stuff that was there, including the giant reflective sun icon, and the rest of the fountains and stuff that kind of lined that area, have been replaced by this new kind of theme that kind of tells a different story, but that's not what we're really here to discuss. So as guests kind of enter the park in its original form, it's kind of saying welcome to California, and here is all of that stuff about California that you expect to see, and it is beautiful. It's well crafted. Now, how effective is it?
That's a really good question. How effective is the current entry? No, we're talking about day one.
Day one.
How effective was day one entry? Well, I mean, minute one entry was probably pretty cool, or for anybody not from California, it was probably pretty cool. I had the privilege of being able to talk to and interact with and spend a lot of time with people from all over the world. And it seems like that kind of idealized representation of California, as if it's a picture perfect postcard where there's Beach Boys music playing all the time and, you know, sunshine and this kind of like this glossy facade of California, is the reputation that the state of California has all over the world. And so for the first time that you walk in, and maybe if it's your first visit to California, it might have been extremely effective. But I think a lot of that glossy sheen of what looked like the idealized California soon became almost like an outdated parody of itself. Somehow that 2001 design got dated very quickly. And then it felt like, at least looking back at pictures, it felt like you were walking into a postcard that was almost laughing at your perception of California.
Yeah, almost so fake so as to point out its own fakeness.
Right. And certain other opening day attractions throughout the park made that contrast between like real and idealized California super, super obvious also. I'm thinking specifically about the travesty that was the Superstar limo ride.
Oh my goodness. Can we talk for a moment about the Superstar limo ride, which opened in 2001 and was closed by 2002?
I didn't realize it closed that fast.
Yeah, 1 year.
Because I have such an incredibly vivid memory of that ride, as if I had ridden it 100,000 times. Something about it sticks in my head so thoroughly. And that, talk about dating itself quickly, that ride was outdated on opening day.
Yeah, day one.
It had references to a version of Hollywood that hadn't existed in decades. And
at least a few years, right?
Yeah.
It had this concept of fame that felt very, very artificial.
So artificial, and it leans really heavily on references from the like 80s and 90s, when it was almost like an MTV generation look at what fame is.
Sure.
And it used a lot of like business lingo from The Business, and this idea of this like overly tanned Beverly Hills agent with bright white teeth driving you around, and there's the stars, and there's the Walk of Fame. It's this talk about like a parody of itself. But the Superstar limo ride was like, okay, you've walked into this picture perfect version of California, and here is this weirdly irreverent, a little too mature for a dark ride, like, look at the Hollywood business, of which Disney's a part of. So it's weird that they would pick it apart like that.
Yeah.
It dated itself so quickly.
Absolutely. And listeners who want to know more about the Superstar limo ride, I recommend Defunct Land has a wonderful episode on YouTube about this ride specifically and the production kind of travesties that happen along the way. It was a very different ride in its early days, and eventually became this kind of monstrosity that got away from everybody who was involved with its production. And the thing that I remember the most about it is either not knowing who these people were that were being shown to me, because they are not iconic Disney characters, and they're not having a fun adventure that I'm along for the ride on, or being bored because the ride is very, very slow. And
yeah, it's slow, but it was also like hectic and loud, and
so it kind of was both at once, right? And
yeah, you're not moving very fast, but there's a lot happening, like cameras flashing and people shouting, and the agent guy on the recording in the limo yelling.
It was just, it felt like a very, very rushed, confused production. So it was no wonder that it closed down in 2002 and has since been replaced by Monsters, Inc. Mike and Sully to the Rescue.
Yes.
Now
better.
here's another opening day attraction that was in Hollywood, the Hollywood Backlot, as it was called in 2001. The ABC soap opera Bistro.
Oh, we had a request from someone on Twitter that we talk about the ABC soap opera Bistro, or rather mentioning it as something that they wish that they could have experienced. When did that close?
2002. So it was another year-long thing. I don't know how else to call it. It only lived a year. And in that year, it was a restaurant with dining areas that were replicas of sets of Port Charles, All My Children, One Life to Live, and General Hospital.
None of which I've ever watched.
According to its Wikipedia entry, restaurant employees would involve visitors in mock scenarios based on the plots of those series. And Alice, you and I were looking at a few photos of the dining option, as it were.
Yeah, we were far too young to be interested in something like that.
Really was not for us, was it?
No, not at all.
Not in 2001 and 2002, and probably not today if it were still open. But then again, looking at it, it really did look like an appealing, fun, interesting, well-themed dining area. So it is kind of a shame that you and I, even though we were there almost all the time, never got to even really consider it an option.
Right. But I wonder what a restaurant like that in the middle of a theme park, in the middle of specifically a Disney theme park, was doing to like the immersion of being in a theme park. That kind of like restaurant feels like it should belong at Universal Studios or something. Universal Studios as a place that wholeheartedly embraces the peek behind the curtain of movie magic.
Yeah, the kind of artificiality of it all.
Right, where Disney relies so heavily on full immersion and suspension of disbelief. I wonder what a restaurant like that says about Disney, like why Disney chose to use that.
And that's really interesting, because now that I think about it, probably the last thing, or one of the last things that I want to be reminded of while at Disney is that they also own a network called ABC, and that they also own ESPN, and that they also own, all these other companies, and that they're just kind of leveraging these properties to make a variety of differently themed shows, mostly for grown-ups.
Right, and it's a difference between Disney owning Marvel and Disney owning Lucasfilm and developing those worlds like as lands and as places you can go and places you can be immersed in, whereas ABC and ESPN are real world, like
kind of,
there's no disbelief.
Yeah, they're just kind of businessy TV networks. They report news and show soap operas or sporting
Sport.
events. Like, there's not a
Yeah.
lot going on there in terms of imagination.
Right. So I guess soap opera is as close as it gets to fantasy for like network TV like ABC. It, it does require a version of suspension of disbelief to believe that these shows might not real. I'm pretty sure every soap opera fan knows how fake and silly it is, but I guess it goes with the theme. But to specifically go into a place like that, like a restaurant like that, that is on purpose surrounding you with set pieces and like, this is what the set looks like, and not you're on an adventure with the characters. But
To point out to you how fake it is, and almost to wink at that. And to say like, this whole thing is fake, and welcome to the fake theme park, the fake California, the fake Hollywood. And I could see where that kind of adds to the discomfort that you might feel. Imagine getting off of Superstar limo and being like, I need something to eat. This has been too much. And then to sit down and to be kind of assaulted by the fakeness of it all. And to have somebody sit down and be like, "You're on General Hospital. Here's the set." It feels kind of wrong, almost sleazy for Disney.
it does, and it directly contradicts that postcard opening that you walked in on. It doesn't feel like this, like, pretty glossy idealized California anymore. It feels like a peek behind the curtain. It's and that's not anything Disney does usually.
Yes.
In contrast to that, though, also in the Hollywood studios or Hollywoodland part of was the animation studio,
which is still there today.
Yes, and that is still there, and it was there on day one. Somehow the animation studio is a look behind the curtain, like how does animation get made, and it's also like a little educational on the process, but it still feels it and there's a reason why it is still around. Was it somehow walked that line.
Yeah, it still feels like an adventure. It feels like being welcomed into this magic process of animation. And it's backed up by the kind of phases of the process that you're able to take part in, right? The sorcerer's workshop with the zoetropes and being able to work with frame by frame. And then
we had so much fun with
and then
those.
choosing your character on that quiz, and then lending your voice to Ursula.
Yeah, where it's not just, here's how voiceover works, but they give you this like little game where it is Ursula actually stealing your voice.
And that might have been my first, and this is so funny because here we are sitting in front of a pair of microphones and putting this on the line, as it were. But that might have been my first experience with, voiceover at all. It's just kind of standing in front of this thing and putting my voice into, I think it was the Seven Dwarves.
Hi-ho, hi-ho. Yeah, that was the shortest one. I remember, like, if we couldn't stick around the animation studio for very long, we could do just the hi-ho song. We could sing along with that. But we also used to just, like, add our own dumb jokes, and it would play it back for us.
Completely ignoring the script.
Yeah, we used to do the scene from Aladdin, and we would give Jafar funny voices, and
But that was all part of it. And I think that may have been an early intention of California Adventure in general. So if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about my pet topic this week.
I would love for you to talk about your pet topic.
I would like to talk about the educational purposes of California Adventure, and I'd like to talk about the kind of 3 themed areas that were directly just kind of saying to its audience, like, learn something about the state. Um, and one of the opening day areas that is now called a Bug's Land was originally called Bountiful Valley Farm. It was a combination water play area and educational exhibit about the agriculture of California. And it had displays of farm equipment, which were all, I'm learning now, Caterpillar products. And they showcased the crops that are specifically produced in California, which is a very big farming state. Which is something that a lot of people, when they're thinking about the postcard version of California, kind of tend to forget, right? That we have these large expanses of very fertile land that we can grow special crops on, crops that you can't grow elsewhere in the country, or crops that just grow better here. So here's this area that says California is wonderful, and I think that's part of the story of California. That California Adventure originally wanted to tell is California is wonderful, and here's something special about it that maybe isn't fun when you just look at it, kids, but actually has a lot to do with the state's culture, and has a lot to do with its role, maybe either as part of the country or part of the rest of the world, and that farming culture. I mean, Anaheim itself was a farming town before it became Disney. So to kind of pay homage to that and point it out is noble, I would say.
Right. Specifically, that land that Disneyland sits on now was a bunch of orange groves.
Which might bring us to another now defunct attraction. The orange stinger, which I believe was just a giant orange peel with bees inside of it.
It's a strange concept, or a strange theming for a very simple ride.
But the orange is culturally important, especially to the Orange County and Anaheim area.
Right, it's called Orange County for a reason. There was acres and acres and acres of orange groves, and it's still like culturally significant to the surrounding areas, like nearby Cal State Fullerton. One of their colors, they're like a navy and orange is their color, and orange specifically because of the orange groves that used to be all over and around the campus. So the orange groves, or the references to the farmland that is all over California as part of what then became Bug's Land.
Right. And, you know, in retrospect, I kind of see the connection to some of the other areas of California Adventure, including the winery, which was called the Golden Vine Winery in 2001 and is still there today. And the winery, you know, pointing out California's rich wine heritage and our areas of the state that are wine producing. I think the Golden Vine Winery even has some grapevines that it has, you know, constantly growing and being harvested and things like that. I'm not sure if they produce their own wine, but that is another piece of California that is very much, and I don't know how else to put this, not for babies.
Right. As an adult,
have fun with that.
I did just eat at the restaurant up there and sample some of their wines up there. Just this past, I say up there, it's up on a hill. People who haven't been might not know that, but I refer to it as up there because it's up on like this big hill in the middle of the park. Just this past October, I was there with my mom. It was really the first time not the first time I'd been to California Adventure since being of legal drinking age, but the first time I ever spent any time up there appreciating it. And it's just lovely. It's got, the food was really good and the wine was great. And our dinner reservations came with 2 priority seating tickets to the World of Color that night.
Oh, wow, that's perfect.
It was exactly perfect. It would have been, it was just like a perfect night. It was a perfect way to end the night. As an adult, even though there were kids at that restaurant, but they were not having as much fun as my mother and I were with our delicious wine and cocktails.
So again, good theming, noble idea connecting to California's wine culture, maybe even a little education, because it opened with a show, a film presentation called Seasons of the Vine.
I did not watch
which
that.
took viewers through the journey of wine production in California. It was closed in 2008. So that educational slant, that pointing out a piece of California's history and culture, and then kind of explaining it and maybe giving you a chance to experience it a little bit. So speaking of experiences, one more now defunct thing in California Adventure was in what was then called the Pacific Wharf, and that was an area based on Monterey's Cannery Row, which is an amazing place to visit if you're ever actually in the state.
Actually going to visit, way more fun and interesting than the book Cannery Row.
No, nothing like that. A lot of great areas to hang out, and they have, of course, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is one of the best aquariums ever. But the attraction that I wanted to talk about was the Mission Tortilla Factory. An important attraction to us, as we said before in the episode. We would grab our free tortilla from the tour of the Mission Tortilla Factory, and we would...
But you'd have to go through the whole show to get to your free tortilla.
Right, so we would...
And we would sometimes go like 2 or 3 times a day.
So we would get in line, and then we'd watch the tour, and we'd wait for the animated dog to say Maseka.
Maseka.
And then we would say it with the dog, just like that, and then we
Maseka.
we would go, and the tortilla machine is going nuts making these free tortillas, and we would just grab a few, and it was no big deal.
No one was with us almost ever. It was so...
Yeah, it was like they would run the tour just for us. Which, again, we'll talk a little bit more about the low attendance and stuff like that.
Sure.
But, the Tortilla Factory, pointing out California's relationship with Mexican culture and Mexican foods, and then kind of explaining where the tortilla comes from and the process that has, of course, been modernized over many generations, and then kind of giving you a chance to experience that, a sample of a tortilla. And right across the way, of course, it's still there. It's the Boudin Bakery. Boudin? Not important. Sourdough Bakery. You get your slice of sourdough bread at the end of a very similar tour. And that's much more San Francisco focused because that's where the bakery actually is. So, these tours, these areas that are meant to kind of represent real life areas of California. And this intention of educating the guests, of giving them a chance to learn something, and then like a little treat at the end, is very, very, it's not antithetical to Disney completely. Disney doesn't always want to just entertain you. There's a lot of material produced by the company, both in the past and currently, that is educational in nature. I'm thinking of Bill Nye the Science Guy, which was a Disney show. I'm thinking of my favorite animated short of all time, Donald Duck in Mathmagic Land. Right,
yes,
where
I knew you were
Donald travels to a magical world of mathematics and learns about music and the golden ratio, and it's really, really dumb and beautiful. So even thinking about the Epcot Center, which, stood for the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, it was this idea that there could be an entire theme park that was designed like an ideal community, a community that used technology to make a better future. And it's a very educational park. There's an attraction there called Living with the Land, for example, that is a display of different farming techniques. And, it's been a very long time since I've been to Florida and the Epcot Center. But California Adventure is not alone in this. And I don't think this part of the theme park deserves as much ridicule, perhaps, as it received. Because there are parts of Epcot that are just as intent on educating you, just as intent on telling you a thing about a place and then letting you experience it. I mean, that is the Global Pavilion area, right? Here's a thing about name a country, Norway, and here's your chance to learn about Norway on a ride. And maybe the execution wasn't so great in California, but the spirit of that, the intention was still there. And I think that's actually something that's pretty special.
Yeah, I never really thought about it like that, and I've never been to Epcot, so I don't think I was able to make that connection before. I'm glad that you did, because yeah, so much of Day One California Adventure was educational, or at least demonstrative. Like, look at California and look at how great this is, and look at all of the cool things that you can find in our very cool state.
All of the cool things you can find in our very cool state.
It's a very cool state,
I would like
and
to
I'm very proud of it.
I would like to petition to have our state motto changed from Eureka to very cool state.
Look at all the cool things you can find in our very cool state.
And I'd like that printed on every California postcard.
I'm pretty sure that that's what Eureka translates.
Oh yeah, in the Latin.
In the Latin.
So, Alice, I've kind of covered the stodgy kind of educational kind of school, but at Disneyland kind of side of the park. And maybe I was thinking about passing it over to you now that I've kind of covered everything.
I think you didn't cover everything.
I'm sorry?
You're missing something very, very important.
I don't believe that I skipped anything.
What I believe you skipped was the 23-minute California extravaganza that was Golden Dreams, featuring Whoopi Goldberg.
Featuring Whoopi Goldberg. You're right, and Alice, for a little while that attraction was a joke between you and I, right?
Yeah.
But we were just talking about it when we were planning this episode. And we've decided that Golden Dreams, above all of the other things in California Adventure, deserves kind of a second look. Because as kind of silly as it might have seemed, or maybe as it might have seemed unappealing to us, especially in 2001, between the years of 2001 and 2008, which were basically all of our high school and middle school years, when we would have scoffed at it and run the other direction practically. This is 23 minutes condensing the history of California, romanticizing it a little bit, and also pointing out kind of the different dreams of the different groups, many of which are historically marginalized groups, as they came into the state. And I think if we're going to talk about that the right way, we're going to have to spend a little more time on it than we have today. So we're going to skip it for now. But don't worry, Golden Dreams, we will be back.
Yes, I think an entire episode dedicated to Golden Dreams may sound unconventional, but I think it's a pretty good idea to take another look at that. So yeah, moving on from the educational side of Day One California Adventure, let's talk a little bit about the fun stuff. Specifically, let's talk about Paradise Pier.
Let's talk about Day One 1.0 Paradise Pier.
So Day One 1.0 Paradise Pier was supposed to be mock-up of... hold on, let me think about it.
An amalgamation of...
An amalgamation of the different boardwalk-style piers that we have in California, specifically the Santa Monica Pier as being the closest one to Los Angeles and to Disneyland. Day One Paradise Pier was kind of a gaudy, like over-the-top, like
almost
carnival.
garish.
Like garish, yeah, carnival. And it was supposed to remind you of, and they had games that you could pay extra to play. They had the Maliboomer, which was designed to look like those like mallet games that you play at a carnival, where you.
Of course, that was a space shot themed ride. So the kind of ride that starts you off at the bottom of a tower and then shoots you up.
Yeah, rather than like bringing you to the top and dropping you. You shot up, and then there was the bell at the top, like one of those games that you play at the carnival. And
Right.
a traditional boardwalk style roller coaster, California Screamin', which still might be, with the exception of what was Tower of Terror and now is Guardians of the Galaxy, might be the best ride in California Adventure.
I tend to I don't disagree. I think Screamin' has been, and maybe when it's rethemed as the Incredicoaster, will be maybe the smoothest, best roller coaster of its kind.
It is a wonderful roller coaster. And
it is really good. And it was their opening day, and in all of its glory. And it was meant to recall the great wooden roller coasters of the past, but it was nothing like them.
Because it's smooth and it's
modern
fast
steel tube design.
Yeah. It's
with of course a launch, which is so cool.
The launch is cool. The loop is cool. It's the only ride in the Disney park, in the California Disney parks, that goes all the way upside down.
Yes.
And is generally really fun. And so you walk over to Paradise Pier and you walk under. There's a couple ways into Paradise Pier, but I like to walk under that kind of hugely gaudy and garish Paradise Pier sign in the middle, going over the water. And there's, a carnival, and it's got a carousel, and it's very basic. It's like
basic, I think, is a very good word for it.
It doesn't push any boundaries. It doesn't change anything that you know as a pier style theme park. It's just Paradise Pier on day one. There's nothing to distinguish it from any other pier that you can go to Santa Monica Pier and ride a roller coaster that's actually over the ocean.
Sure.
And this is going to bring us to the conversation on the simulacrum, on the idea of the simulacrum.
This literary concept on the show that treats theme park rides and attractions like literature.
We're actually now going to go ahead and talk about a literary concept rather than just our interpretation of stories. This is legit.
So Simulacra is kind of a postmodern concept, right, Alice?
Yes, I love postmodernism. I love talking about postmodernism. So Simulacra shares its root with the word simulation. The idea is that a simulacra is a representation of a representation, or a symbol of a symbol. It is not just a symbol on its own. It's taking a look at a thing as it represents the idea of a thing. Am I explaining this right? Maybe you can.
I think you're getting towards it. So it means that there's the representation of representations, and there's also the critical part of it, which kind of says that simulacra challenge our perception of what is real. And that simulations can serve as substitutions for the original rather than representations. So this creates a distance between the simulacra and the original that kind of not destroys, but definitely muddies the water surrounding the original. So the original, in the face of a good enough simulacra, can be deemed unnecessary. so when we're talking about Paradise Pier, and maybe by extension, the rest of California Adventure, we are looking at a theme park-sized simulacra of these original things here in our glorious Golden State.
Right. Paradise Pier is not just a physical representation of the piers and the theme parks on piers that we've been to, but rather it's a representation of the representation of those piers.
Yeah, it's almost a copy of a copy.
Yeah.
It's one order of magnitude removed from, say, a postcard, which is a copy. It then copies the postcard and brings it to life.
And that's exactly the very, very, very first steps that you take into Disney's California Adventure 1.0. It's this postcard look, but it's also what this postcard would look like if it came to life. And so it's two steps back from the real thing, which where California Adventure struggled was it's two steps back away from this real thing, and that real thing is across the street. It's around the corner. They're creating this simulacra of California when you're in California. It's
it's so strange, and that was a very early complaint of the theme park. The word simulacra wasn't really thrown around, I think, just generally, but the complaint that the park was redundant, that it had things that you could visit just as easily as visiting Disneyland, depending on where else you were able to go while you were either visiting California or while living there. Santa Monica Pier and Paradise Pier by extension is probably the most egregious, right? It's kind of hard to get to downtown LA. You know, you got to kind of wait in traffic. You got to figure out parking and stuff. And Hollywood on its own is kind of a difficult thing to get to. The Santa Monica Pier has a parking structure. It can be visited. It's got a whole beach next to it. It's a very big area with lots to do. And
aside from the traffic, yeah, is very easy to get to.
And it literally under an hour from Disneyland.
And it's right there,
on the right day.
And it looks exactly like Paradise Pier. Maybe,
almost. Well, not quite, right?
Yeah, not quite. And that's the thing, is if you might look at it from afar and go, oh, it looks like Paradise Pier. But Paradise Pier is like a hyper real version of Santa Monica Pier, or the Santa Cruz Boardwalk at Santa Cruz, or
right.
It's almost so basic and bland that is somehow all of those boardwalks, and yet can't quite capture why those places are so iconic.
And they don't capture the parts of them that make them special or original. Santa Monica Pier and Santa Cruz, for example, are separated by hundreds of miles, and there are different cultures surrounding them. For example, next to Santa Monica Pier is what's called Muscle Beach, right?
Oh man, Venice Beach, Muscle Beach.
These areas that are dedicated to certain styles and that have remnants of certain movements that are in and of themselves unique and are part of a culture. And the pier, the real pier,
counterculture.
Right, and significant counterculture as well. So the real pier, as you know, cleaned up and kind of corporate as it is on its own now, is a symbol of Santa Monica. It's this icon that people kind of flock to and rally around and have built communities around. Paradise Pier is nothing of the sort. It is a completely clean, sterile, not natural, not a wooden coaster, even though it looks like a wooden coaster.
Right. It's to its very structure, a fake. It's a phony. And all of these theme parks, like all of California Adventure is. Disneyland is also, it's not really the Matterhorn Mountain. It's not really the big, beautiful mansion in the Bayou of New Orleans. It's all fake, but they somehow missed the part where these things can be fake, but also like immerse you in the feeling of really being there.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge difference between California Adventure and Disneyland, is that Disneyland feels natural, but also exotic and fantastic and lived in and weird, whereas California Adventure feels bigger in some ways, but less intimate, less personal, and less exact. I feel like the Haunted Mansion, even though there are several Haunted Mansions around the world at various Disney parks, I feel like our Haunted Mansion in California is its own place. It's a real place. It's not, it represents other things, right?
Right.
But it is also its own thing.
It might as well have grown out of the ground there in that spot. And
that's partially just successful theming, but I think there's also something going on with what it is, and how it is placed there.
Here's another thing too, and something that it may not seem immediately obvious, just like to the layperson, but it's not just theming, but Disney did something very, very specific with Disneyland that they ignored with California Adventure, and that is completely enclosing park.
Right. Another huge complaint in its opening was the lack of a berm. Berm is the word.
The word is berm, but Disneyland itself is totally shut in. You cannot see any outside power lines. You will rarely see like planes flying over. When you're in Disneyland, you are in Disneyland. To the point where when I worked there, somebody asked my coworker why it was raining. She was so convinced that Disneyland itself controlled its own weather system.
Well, it turns out that is an incredibly expensive system to run, and they only turn it out during peak park days.
Yeah, naturally.
So that was just a slower day, and it wasn't worth it. But the that immersiveness, that feeling of Disneyland being separate and magical in that separateness as well, is absent at California Adventure.
Right. In California Adventure, you can see the power lines of the surrounding city of Anaheim. The
Anaheim Convention Center.
The Anaheim Convention Center can be seen from Paradise Pier.
You can see my house from the top of California Screaming.
That's not really a lie or a joke. I'm pretty sure I can see your house from there.
I mean, I would always say, I can see my house from here as I went up, but that was just, I think, me being silly. We were very close to Disneyland. What can I say?
And we did spend a lot of time there.
Yes.
A lot of time on that ride.
But yeah, it's funny because, the Simulacra concept, kind of applies to both of the places for sure. But I think in California Adventure is used in perhaps the destructive way. The way that says, forget the actual Redwood National Forest. Here is a safe challenge trail where you can learn all about the wonders of the Redwood National Forest, and never experience any of the actual challenges of going to it.
Right, in that dead zone part of the park that I forgot.
We actually never even talked about until just now, right? And
yeah, we did not mention that in planning or anything.
But let's be real. It's a nice part of the park.
It's pretty.
It's very well themed. It's pretty. Grizzly River Rapids is a fun enough raft ride. It's connected to the Grand Californian, which is a beautiful hotel. And the place at which they're connected, that little bridge there, is really, really pretty as well.
Yeah, but that's all it is, though. It's just
pretty.
It's
It is
pretty,
pretty.
but instead of saying, like, look at what we've, I don't know, it's different than, say, walking through the forest or the jungle of Adventureland, where that theming is different. There's stuff going on. There's shops. There's rides. There's a whole section of the back end of the park by the Grand Californian that's just a walk path through trees, and it's pretty, but it doesn't serve a purpose except maybe to make you think for a minute that you're actually in a forest.
Yeah, to kind of give you that impression. And I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of California Adventure is about, is impressions. One of my favorite things about California Adventure, as you kind of round that corner through that walking path, is you look to your left and you see the Painted Ladies of San Francisco.
Right.
Not next to nothing.
Next to nothing.
Next
Out of
to
nowhere.
next to no shops, next to no dining options, next to no attractions, except now it's kind of close to the Little Mermaid ride, what was once Golden Dreams.
Right. But it's
there's
not
nothing
even
right
like
there.
over near like the Pacific Wharf section of the park, which is supposed to be like the Bay Area kind of look. They're not connected to each other. There's very far away from each other.
They're easily another rounded corner and another 2 minutes walking. It's weird. It's weird that that's a thing, that exists. It feels, again, purposeless. And I think that purposelessness is another thing that California Adventure lacks over Disneyland. Disneyland, which feels smaller in a lot of ways.
It is smaller, I think, in a lot.
I think it is like literally smaller, but but feels denser for all of that smallness. Whereas California Adventure feels empty, even in its current incarnation. Sometimes.
Right. So, Buddy, that brings us to present day California Adventure, I think. I think now we should just spend a couple minutes talking about California Adventure 2.0, or the renovation of California Adventure, which kind of actually started in 2004 with the addition of the Tower of Terror, Hollywood Tower of Terror ride, which was a huge draw and really kind of started changing people's perception of California Adventure. As now, this is a place to go. This is where the cool rides are. I think
Right.
as we started entering high school, let's say around 2005 to 2008, 2009, we started treating California Adventure as a place where, if you wanted to go to Disneyland for fun, cutesy nostalgia, you went to California Adventure for the thrills and the chills.
Yeah, and California Adventure very much kind of embraced that part of its identity, I suppose. Because, early criticisms, again, were more towards there isn't anything here for the kids to do. The kids can't ride these rides at Paradise Pier. The kids don't want to learn about California history or culture. So what are they supposed to do? Because the ABC soap opera dining option really isn't for them. So California Adventure, I suppose somebody must have said, okay, fine, it's not for them. And they added, another big thrill ride in the Tower of Terror, and then that kind of changed the attitude. Now California Adventure is a little bit more mature in the willingness to be thrilling.
Right. And we appreciated that growing up.
Definitely at the time. But the renovation of California Adventure is ongoing, right?
Right. Because recently, just in the last couple of years or so, they've decided to take out some of the original theming, specifically starting at near the front of the park. They removed the big California letters. They took out the Golden Gate Bridge. They completely overhauled the entrance plaza to now what is called Buena Vista Street. Buena Vista Street is now this really beautiful themed area that is supposed to look like the Los Angeles in the 1920s when Walt Disney arrived from Missouri to make his way in the business.
To seek his fortune.
This is Walt's California.
Walt's California adventure, as you might say.
I might even say that.
You might even say that. It's funny because, as part of the rebranding, as part of the refurb, they dropped the apostrophe S from Disney's California Adventure. But really just plain old Disney California Adventure. But it really now does seem like this is Disney's California Adventure, at least the Buena Vista Street part,
Right.
which then kind of links up to Hollywood in a really nice, cohesive way. This kind of little area, this corner that is all Walt's Hollywood as he would have experienced it.
Right. And other little details have changed throughout the park, too. For example, they took out the giant orange from the Orange Stinger. And now it's a ride called Silly Symphony Swings?
Silly Symphony Swings.
Silly Symphony Swings is now like it's still the swings ride. It's still the same like classic kind of carnival ride. But instead of being a giant orange for California, it's themed now towards the early Disney cartoons. Part of what made Disney Disney when he first started out. So somehow these little changes that have been made and the taking out of some of the more garish and obnoxious parts of the park, like the Superstar Limo, and they changed the theming of the Mulholland Madness ride to be Goofy Sky School. Some of these dated cultural references about California now become almost like a period piece.
Yeah, a sort of celebration of a emerging Disney culture.
Right.
Maybe perhaps even before Disneyland was a thing. So kind of retro to the nth degree. No longer
Right.
1955, now it's 1925, 1935.
Right. And that somehow, just those itty bitty little changes, have stripped away one of those layers of the Simulacra and now feels less like a parody of itself and more like a symbol of California.
Right, a symbol of a certain piece of California history. And that piece of California history just happens to be the insanely popular, rise of Disney. So I think of Carthay Circle, which, is a rebuilt kind of representation of the theater that Snow White premiered in 1937. And it's this beautiful restaurant on the inside that has pictures of Walt Disney. And, it kind of celebrates the award-winning kind of rise in popularity of Snow White and kind of how that put the studio on the map and really solidified it as a national brand. And that's so much more meaningful than dining in a soap opera.
We keep going back to that.
I'm sad to make fun of it over and over again, but really it's not a very good concept compared to look at this time and place, this other place that you can step into.
Right. It becomes that immersive. Immersivity?
Yeah, sir. Immersivity.
Immersivity.
We're going to get that printed on a t-shirt.
I like it. It brings that immersivity into California Adventure that we did not have. It puts the park in a time and place rather than just free floating its way through all of California history. And it and in that way forms itself a small but not insignificant connection to the original Disneyland park, and by giving it a time and place and kind of cementing it to the ground a little, now the two parks can almost feel like two halves of a whole.
Sure.
It's two halves of the same
They're
experience,
almost
rather than
companion pieces to one another.
right, rather than just, oh, there's Disneyland, oh, and also California Adventure.
We were talking to each other before the show about how maybe California Adventure will never be on equal footing with Disneyland in terms of belovedness and timelessness.
Or popularity. Like sheer numbers.
But it may be on its way to being close. And I think, some of the recent changes especially have come under a little bit of fire, such as the decision to now change the Bugs Land area to a Marvel themed land. And also, Cars Land, which I thought Cars Land was a nice way to kind of bridge a Disney property with...
Oh, I think Cars Land is beautiful.
It's amazing. It's a nice way to bridge a Disney property with California as a culture. California loves its cars, but also Monument Valley and those areas kind of along Route 66 are not just in California. They're just as much a part of Nevada and Arizona, perhaps, as they are Californian. But, the Route 66 aesthetic is very Californian as well. And a lot of people experience it on their way to California. So Cars Land, I always thought was kind of a natural fit. But, Bugs Land always kind of felt like a little shoehorned, a little not quite Californian. And this new Marvel Land is kind of not very Californian either.
It's not. And this might be where some of the theming starts to fall apart. Not that I'm not excited for Marvel Land.
No, let me be clear. Marvel Land is going to be awesome. But does it contribute to the cohesiveness that maybe California Adventure 2.0 was heading towards? Maybe not. Maybe not.
No, maybe not. And maybe Star Wars Land tacked on to Disneyland might not be either. But there's still, at the end of the day, what we do keep forgetting is that Disneyland is for children. And these movie tie-in rides and stuff like that have always been really popular with kids. And maybe it's okay that not every single little thing fits exactly right. And then also maybe we can just trust that the Imagineers know what they're doing. Sure. And that they'll find a way to tie it all together.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it seems to me with the retheming of Paradise Pier to Pixar Pier, and now the addition of Marvel Land, you can kind of see Buena Vista Street as the beginning of Disney as an institution. And then you can kind of see the celebration of the modern in these new places.
Ooh. Yeah, I like that.
And being very up to date and very technological and being thrilling is part of what Disney's trying to build into its current brand. So, California Adventure can be a showcase of that as well. And I think a great example of how that kind of all fits together might be the World of Color light show, which, opens with that classic Walt Disney presents The World of Color, right? And that's from the 1950s TV show with Walt. And then, you've got kind of a celebration of all of the great movies that have come out since then with light and music and water and pyrotechnics. And it's great. I think what Disney California Adventure can be is a celebration of the present and past of Disney and the things that bridge the two, where Disneyland might always be kind of rooted in classicality. Classicality might be a new word. Might always be
I'm going to start making a
rooted
list.
in classicality and rooted in, broad stroke genres, and certain ideas that were kind of integral to its construction. California Adventure can say nah to all of that and just kind of be like, Marvel is our new thing. Let us show you how big and great Marvel can be. Step into the world and meet your heroes. Pixar is the cutting edge of animation technology. Step into that world and meet your heroes. And it's a different kind of invitation, but I think it's a valid invitation.
Yeah, I think it has the potential to be something really great.
Well, Alice, our time talking about DCA 1.0, Disney's California Adventure, on its opening day has come to an end. But now is the time for us to have a couple of shout-outs and responses from listeners out there.
That's right. We had a really excellent week on Twitter, striking up multiple engaging, fun conversations with a lot of really cool Diz Twitter folk. So thank you to everyone who is, whether you're listening or not, thank you for at least engaging with us on Twitter. We're having a great time.
Yes, thank you so much. At Nix Pix, that's NIXPIXWDW, shouted us out in a welcome tweet, just like a thank you for following, which started a huge love fest with a lot of people, and we really enjoyed that. Twitter can be kind of angry and negative sometimes, and we really appreciate a nice, good, positive thread where we all just like share how happy we are to be connected to one another. That was pretty great.
There's a lot of random tweets about hugging people, and it just it got real lovey-dovey and was really super nice. So thank you, Nix Pix. We got a lot of interest and excitement for this episode in particular from a handful of people, including at Orange Grove 55, at Avoid Temptation.
Temptation.
So good. At Oakview Films and at Jacob Edward Lynch. We all responded to our tweet about California Adventure and about the various subjects of tonight's episode. They brought in a lot of good ideas. They were the ones that one of them, I don't remember which one.
Jacob Edward Lynch.
Was it Jacob? Jacob shared the pictures of the soap opera Bistro and got us really excited to talk about it. So excited that we mentioned it more than once.
It's on my mind ever since Jacob mentioned it. I was like, what is this thing? Because it was right in front of our faces for a year. It was right there.
For a whole year. I mean, we were 11 years old and didn't know what a soap opera was, but it's too bad we missed out on that. Because I would go to it now, probably, even not as a soap opera fan. I would participate. If it was at Universal Studios, I'd be all over it.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I would like to specifically thank Charles Gustine again for having just all the best movie opinions. Charles and I bonded this week on Twitter over our mutual love of a couple of different movies, Shakespeare in Love and Crimson Peak specifically. He is an incredibly intelligent, funny person to talk to on Twitter, having a great time listening to each other's podcasts. His podcast is called Iconography, and it is my current podcast obsession. He does an incredible job on his podcast, and I went ahead and left him a 5-star review, which everyone who listens to and enjoys a podcast should do for that podcast that they listen to and enjoy.
It is the quickest, best way to help us out.
That's true.
And one thing I'd like to say about Charles specifically, because I also have really enjoyed talking to him on Twitter, it is because of Charles that we are sitting here talking about DCA 1.0. Charles gave us this seed of an idea, like, I wonder, what was the storytelling in DCA 1.0? Why did it fail the way that it did? What happens when people don't buy into the entire concept of a theme park? And that really got us thinking, and I hope, Charles, that we've kind of satisfied your curiosity on that front, because I'm really proud of the conversation we just had, so I think we might have really landed on something great about DCA.
Yeah, and we still would like to hear more from you on the subject, and more from everyone on the subject. If you've liked what, if you like it, if you have thoughts, if you have opinions, if you think we're super wrong about everything, at us.
All right. And thank you so much to special correspondent Kate Prince for all of her love and support.
Thanks, Kate. We love you. And thank you so much to honorary commentator Natasha Chowdhury for just being generally amazing and supportive.
Again, guys, just whenever you have a thought about one of the theme parks that you find important and interesting, just send it our way, and we would be happy to respond to you guys. We love discourse with our fans. Thank you for listening to Those Happy Places. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
The research for this episode was done by Alice White and edited by Buddy Duquesne.
This episode was produced by Alice White and edited by Buddy Duquesne.
Our theme music is Golden Gate by the California Feetwarmers, featuring Phil Alvin. Find the Feetwarmers on YouTube or on their website, californiafeetwarmers.com.
I just realized that theme song was super appropriate for this week's episode. So
it really was.
Thank you, California Feetwarmers and Phil Alvin.
Thank you to both of you.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends. Send people to our website at www.thosehappyplaces.com and join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/thosehappyplaces, where we're always talking about theme parks and ideas for future episodes. And we're also on Twitter.
That's right. I'm at Buddy_Duquesne. Duquesne is spelled Duquesne.
And I'm at Alice White, THP, for, you guessed it, Those Happy Places.
Thanks for listening. We hope you return to Those Happy Places.